It's Sunday, August 25th, 2024, and we are 71 days away from the election. Welcome to today's episode of Make It Make Sense, the mini episode. I'm Grant Herms. On the episode today, we are talking about what the Trump campaign was doing while the rest of us were looking at the DNC last week. So if you'll remember all the way to last weekend, I talked about how Trump was making some really strange decisions about doing rallies in places that were not helpful for this election. He was doing so few of them, like one a week, and then he was holding these rambling press conferences where he came off as a little bit dotty and incoherent. Well, it looks like the campaign is shifting gears a little bit. So during the DNC, he ramped up his campaign schedule. He held a rally every single day last week. He was in Pennsylvania, and then he was in Michigan, and then North Carolina for the second time in just a week. And then he ended his week with 2 full days, Thursday and Friday, in Arizona. And then he's got 2 more rallies planned this coming week in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Also, an interesting thing here is he and J.D. Vance aren't at these rallies together most of the time. J.D. Vance has sort of been out in the wilderness on his own. He had a pretty rough press conference in Michigan, and then most recently he went to a donut shop in Georgia, and it was like he'd never ordered anything from anywhere before. It was reminiscent of when former President George H.W. Bush was in a grocery store, and then he seemed amazed by the woman scanning a carton of milk and the barcode scanner. It's kind of misremembered, but that's the enduring image, and J.D. Vance is giving that a real run for its money, and he is not beating the weird allegations either. But back to Trump. I want to say from the jump here, I didn't get a chance to watch all of these rallies from beginning to end, between doing the minis every day and watching the DNC every night, and then occasionally needing to eat and sleep. I just didn't get a chance to watch them, but the rallies I want to talk about are Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then his back-to-back days in Arizona. Let's talk about his Michigan rally first. Michigan remains an absolutely crucial swing state because it has 15 electoral votes, but it's also the keystone in the blue wall of the Midwest. Those are the states that were, for a long time, considered to be Democratic strongholds, mostly because of working-class labor voters. Michigan was a huge win for Trump in 2016. It was a huge loss for him in 2020, and then his hand-picked candidate to beat, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, lost there by historic margins in 2022, so he's got a grudge that he's holding on to about the state of Michigan. He went to a rally in a town called Howell. It's an interesting place. So first, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, in a solidly red district and county for Trump. He won it by like 23% in 2020. It's a semi-rural working-class town about an hour west of Detroit. It's smack dab between Detroit and the capital of Michigan, Lansing. So it's a weird place for Trump to hold this rally, except for 2 things. First, Biden held a rally there in 2021. I went to that rally. I was working in Detroit at the time. Shout out Rock City. Biden was there to give a speech to drum up support for the bipartisan infrastructure bill at a training center for the Union of Operating Engineers. Those are the folks who operate the heavy machinery on construction sites. Well, outside that rally, Biden was met by Trump supporters, including a dude who was running at Biden supporters and the press with a running chainsaw. Now, that chainsaw didn't have a chain on it, but when somebody runs at you with a revving power tool, you're not going to stick around to find out if it's going to hurt when he gets there or not. There were also folks who had all sorts of really vulgar signs and chants. I mean, take this woman. This is a video that I took at this rally, and I'm going to apologize here for the language in advance. Nice, right? That happened just outside of a school. In fact, in the motorcade, that's what President Biden asked Representative Alyssa Slotkin, was like, hey, isn't this right by a school? And she said that she was embarrassed to have the president go through that town. All of this is to say, though, that Trump has a really solid base in this city and in this county. The other thing here that makes Howell interesting is that for a long time, in the 1970s and 1980s, it was the home of the KKK's Grand Dragon. He lived there, held rallies on his property, held cross burnings on his property until his death in 1992. And it's a legacy that stayed with the city of Howell, where they've had these sort of bubbling ups of these things. In 2005, it made headlines for an auction that sold off KKK robes. In 2014, students at Howell High School posted hate messages online after their basketball team played a mixed-race basketball team from a neighboring town. And then last month, literal neo-Nazis marched in the streets of Howell, shouting things like Heil Hitler, we love Hitler, and we love Trump. Now, Trump was in this town at a sheriff's office to talk about crime and safety and held, by all accounts, what was a pretty sleepy little get-together where he kind of mumbled off pages that were on the podium in front of him to a couple dozen people. So I don't know if you really call it a rally or not, but it's not like he couldn't have done that in a neighboring county or even a neighboring town in that same county with that same sheriff's office. Also a campaign at this level. There is just no way they didn't know about this Nazi march before, nor did they not know about Howell's history. Now, I'm not going to say that they chose to hold this thing there because of those things. We can't know that. What I will say is that they stayed despite knowing those things, and that's a choice. Okay, let's move on to his rally in Pennsylvania. Trump has been there a few times since kicking off his campaign, and like I said, he's going to be there again next week. The Trump campaign sees Pennsylvania as the swing state to win, and it's not hard to see why. It has the most electoral votes up for grab with 19. It's a tone setter for the Rust Belt states and Erie County, to kind of put on my Steve Kornacki break down the numbers khakis here for you. Erie County is a bellwether county that broke for Obama, Trump, and Biden alternating in their winning campaigns. And all of that combined has sort of led to the old adage, so goes this state, so goes the country. Well, now Pennsylvania is this state. Now, Trump has also liked going to Pennsylvania recently because he's been adding lines about the governor there, Josh Shapiro. Now, Shapiro is Jewish and was the runner-up to being the running mate to Kamala Harris. Trump has used that decision by Harris to pitch to Jewish voters that it's Democrats who are the party of anti-Semitism, tying that also into liberal opposition to things like sending more arms to Israel, or their positive stance to Palestinian self-determination, like Harris mentioned in her acceptance speech. That's also today's Substack, by the way, all about the pro-Palestinian delegates at the DNC who were protesting outside, not being able to have one of their delegates speak at the convention. So if you're not subscribed, you should do that. You'll get that article. It also helps me. It helps the show. And most importantly, you'll be able to make a little bit more sense out of the stuff we're talking about. Okay, back to Trump. He's also spending the most money on ads in Pennsylvania. The group Ad Impact, which tracks ad spending, found that the Trump campaign is spending $75.5 million on ads in the Keystone State. That is more than all other swing states combined for the campaign. His next closest state is Georgia, where he's spending like $29 million. The Harris campaign is outspending Trump in every other state by orders of double to 7 times the amount. So Trump is really putting all of his eggs in the basket that is Pennsylvania. Finally, let's talk about Trump's 2 days in the desert. He spent Thursday and Friday in Arizona, where he held mildly attended rallies. He's not packing major arenas like he used to, but the crowds aren't tiny either. So Arizona is important for Republicans for a couple reasons. First, there's an open Senate seat. Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who left the Democratic Party in 2022 to become an independent, decided not to run again after essentially Democrats turned off the fundraising for her for leaving the party. So that seat is up for grabs, and Republicans need every seat they can get this election. They're trying to wrestle back control of the Senate from Democrats so they can fully control all of Congress, assuming that they keep the House. Now, that race is between Democratic Representative Ruben Gallego and Carrie Lake, a former local TV news anchor, an election denier, and a failed gubernatorial candidate. The latest polling there has Gallego up by 7 points. That's from the New York Times Siena poll, a really, really good poll. Trump coming to the state repeatedly to boost support for Carrie Lake is an important move for him and for the party. The other reason that Arizona is important for Trump is the spiritual home, we'll say, for election denial and that movement. After 2020, and the lawsuits in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania petered out or were denied by judges, it was Arizona where groups who were the most nefarious in lying about the election being stolen were operating. They had names like Cyber Ninjas or True the Vote, which now is out of Texas, I believe, but that's kind of neither here nor there. Arizona was also the place where back in April of this year, 17 people were charged with fraud and conspiracy and a few other crimes for their alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election, including Rudy Giuliani and former Trump chief of staff in the White House, Mark Meadows. Kari Lake was the erstwhile leader of that movement, and that lie that the 2020 election was somehow stolen has been a major animating force for Republicans in Arizona, and Trump repeated multiple times during his rallies there last week that Democrats will, quote, try to cheat in this election, even telling the host of one of those rallies to make sure that Democrats don't cheat, which Trump has a history of making calls to action that, let's say, go awry. All of this that I just talked about is to say that the Trump campaign is going to swing states, but he's not making plays to reach new voters. He's doing what he can do to make sure that his base is solid and likely trying to recenter himself by surrounding himself by his strongest supporters. It's also not like we didn't just see that happen with Democrats at their convention, and Harris and Walz have not really been going to unfriendly territory either, but that was pre-DNC, that was pre-Harris acceptance speech, so we'll have to wait and see if both campaigns change strategies here as they hit the final stretch and we come up to the debate, which is in just over 2 weeks. Okay, so that is it for today's MIMS Mini. Please rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. It really helps give the show a bump to reach new viewers. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these videos. You can follow the show on social media at MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod on every platform. And I've already asked you to subscribe to the Substack, so yeah, that's it, I think. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Grant Herms, and I will talk to you tomorrow.